Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You have found the Dark Oak. On today's episode, we investigate the first crime mystery of the social media age and the first true crime story to ever go viral. We delve into the world of Maura Murray.
Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month, through our charity called the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of our earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. To find out how you can be a part of the movement, head over to thedarkoak.com or stay with us until the end of the episode and we will give you all of the details.
Thank you, Cynthia. Okay, no more time for small talk today because we have got to just get into this case. And we already alluded last week, it is going to be a two-parter, maybe a three-parter. I think I'm going to squeeze it into just two very long two-parters, but I'm going to get into it's just a lot of information about Maura Murray and her family. And I mean, it stands to reason there's so much out there because the name Maura Murray is almost kind of synonymous with true crime now because her story has been out there for so long. And there are so many armchair sleuths and internet detectives and a lot of people really invested in this case.
I am definitely obviously familiar superficially with this case, but I'm actually really curious to see what you bring because this is not one where I feel like I know like the ins and outs. So I'm actually really curious about what we're going to hear today.
Yeah, the time of her disappearance, I think it was a positive and a negative in a lot of ways because they were able to spread the word about her disappearance. But because of the new introduction of the internet age, there was also a lot of misinformation about this case, which is a lot of what we're going to cover.
Okay.
Now, Maura's case was the first to become popular on Facebook and MySpace.
Oh, MySpace was my jam, which
Speaking of your jam, what was your MySpace jam? Do you remember? I remember that was my number one thing was to go and change the music on my MySpace page depending on what mood I was in.
oh yeah, mine was always something moody. Think like The Blower's Daughter, Damien Rice. There was a lot of like really
Mine was
angsty.
mine was much more poppy.
Of course it was. No, and my graphics were all like dark and like, you would be like, oh, this poor sad
I need to go
girl.
rescue her.
Yes.
Now, as I said in the very beginning, her case is cited as genuinely the first crime mystery of the social media age. And this makes sense when you realize that she went missing when Facebook was 5 days old.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I actually was late to the game with Facebook. So some of this will definitely feel new to me, but I didn't realize that. I never realized that her case was like the first one to kind of take over social media.
Well, and when she disappeared, she was a college student. And so
And
remember,
that's what Facebook was, right?
exactly. Originally, Facebook was just for college co-eds. I remember even to sign up, you had to have an official college email address.
Okay.
Like it had to be related with the school. So these were her peers
Okay.
that were using this social media platform. And there was no YouTube, there was no Twitter. So it was really just these MySpace pages. There was one dedicated to her disappearance and bringing her back home. So it's, yeah, a lot of history was made in her case. And I don't want to tell that too much because in the end, we're still talking about the disappearance of a young girl and her family is very much missing her. And I want to get into some of that, which leads me to why I decided to cover this case now. Maura Murray's older sister, Julie Murray, has released, I think it was February of this year, her own podcast. And it's all about the disappearance of her sister, Maura.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
It's a 9-part broadcast. And I think she's going to continue to do more seasons of it, not necessarily about Maura, but those that kind of like pull at her heartstrings. She might do multi-part episodes on a specific case to try to bring awareness to that case. And you can tell it's very healing for her and her family in a lot of ways. And again, she felt really compelled to do it to give her family's point of view because of this misinformation, and really try to get the facts of the case out there in the hopes of one day bringing her sister home. And I will tell you, having listened to it, she had so much bravery and grace and skill in presenting her sister's story. And I said, you know what? We have got to bring attention to Maura's case as well, and bring attention to Julie's podcast, which is called Media Pressure. And I'm going to, again, in this 2-part series, try to melt down everything that she said and give you the high points. But if you are interested in this case, and I hope that you are, because hearing Julie, and I'm not going to call it desperation in her voice, but absolutely this urgency to see her sister again. You can feel it in her voice. And she goes through all the details of the case. And there's also interviews with their father, Fred. There's interviews with their brother. There's interviews with some of Maura's friends. So lots of information chalked into these episodes. And again, I'm going to give you kind of the highlights, but I hope this points you back to that Media Pressure podcast, because Julie deserves it.
Well, it sounds like she's really using her platform for good, and not only sharing her sister's case, which you're not even into the story yet, and I'm already like welling up listening
Yeah.
to you speak, but then sharing other people's stories to, try to bring awareness to them. So that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie, for doing that.
Yeah, and a lot of this, I'll reference Julie and Fred, their father, a lot, because a lot of the information was presented from them. A lot of what I put in here as factual came from them.
Okay.
And some of it I was able to corroborate. Some of them, I just believe them. You know what I'm saying? I feel like there is a lot of coming from the horse's mouth, so to speak, by listening to that podcast.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're coming literally from the people who were there.
Right.
So I always think when we're able to be in contact or hear something from like the victim's family, I mean, that's pretty close to the story right there.
Right. And I will present this the same way that Julie did. There are lots of things that I'm going to talk about that they may mean something, they may mean nothing. There are pieces of evidence that may point towards a certain direction. However, that may just be a red herring and means nothing. But to Julie's point, it's better to get it out there in the hopes that it will jog someone's memory. It will mean something to someone, and then they can get more answers. So there's a lot that we're going to talk about as far as the investigation, as far as the crime scene, as far as characters that kind of came and went around the disappearance. It could mean nothing. They could totally be coincidences, but when something smells off, it's worth looking into.
Absolutely. What if that's the one piece that, makes the difference?
Exactly. So I love that she put it all together and put it out there in a way that we can bite off little bits. And again, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just going to give you kind of the high points and tell Maura's story and tell it the most truthful and factual way that I know how. But again, with the goal, as we always do, of trying to solve these cases. I'm trying to bring Maura Murray home. I'm going to get into it by just talking about Maura and introducing who she was, because she was pretty phenomenal. You know, there's the proverbial, if you light up a room, don't ever go outside because something bad's going to happen to you. But these are factual things that say Maura was absolutely amazing. She was brilliant to start with. She swept her high school with high achievement awards for academics and athletics. She was a star kind of in every way. She hung out with high achieving friends. She tutored kids on the side, which Julie admitted was her sometimes, tutored her older
Aw,
sister.
that's adorable.
And Julie is brilliant too. Don't let me, she's not going to downplay
Sure.
herself, but she was like, yeah, Maura totally just crushed it.
Oh,
She was in Latin Club, she was in National Honor Society, and she accomplished an almost perfect score on her SATs.
Okay, go Maura. I
Yeah.
love a smart girl. That's awesome.
Oh, she was all over it. Now, Maura was asked to join the varsity basketball team as a freshman.
Okay, so all right. Now listen. We're brilliant and we're good at sports. Okay.
No, I'm telling you. Like, I'm like, what is it that she couldn't do? And I'm not just
Wow.
puffing smoke. I mean, everything I read, I was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. How is this all possible? By the time she graduated, she had broken every one of the school's athletic records. She even went on to participate in the US Nationals at track, winning 33rd in the country.
Wow.
Yeah, accomplished. She also loved her family. They often went hiking, climbing, and camping together in the mountains of New Hampshire almost every weekend. She loved participating in friendly competitions with their siblings, who were also very talented, as you can imagine, both physically and academically. And she and Julie were particularly close as they both loved to run track together and they developed a really kind of special sisterly bond. In 1998, Julie went on to join West Point, which is a military academy, in the class of 2000. I know we have briefly talked about how competitive West Point is. You have to be top of your class, both academically and also with extracurricular activities. And in order to even be considered, you have to have a congressional nomination, meaning that one of your two state senators or your local state representative has to write a letter endorsing your admission into the university.
Wow.
Now, Julie was desperate to have her sister Maura join her after Maura graduated high school, and she encouraged her to join West Point. Julie wanted her best friend with her, and she thought Maura would also love the structure and challenge at a military institution. And by the time Maura graduated high school, she had swept every academic record in her high school, as I keep repeating, but it's worth repeating. And she finished fourth in her class.
Okay.
She was being recruited by Harvard, Brown, Yale, and all of the other military schools, which are also very competitive, but she had no other choice, really. It was West Point.
It was West Point.
She was going to West Point from the beginning. She was going to be with Julie.
And again, this is obviously a very accomplished family to have two daughters in West Point. I mean, that's amazing.
Blows me away. And listening to Fred talk about how he parented them and his relationship with them. Again, I only know him through a podcast, but I feel like he's everyone's dad.
Sure.
Like he's that kind of guy.
Okay.
And Julie even talks about their relationship with him, about how she never, ever remembers him yelling.
Oh, wow.
It just wasn't his thing. And even he was like, well, no, what does that accomplish? He's like,
Right.
you already feel bad. He's like, your kid already feels bad. Yelling at them, that doesn't solve anything. And Julie's like, oh, I remember. Apparently there was one time she had, quote, borrowed his bike and taken it somewhere and it got stolen. So she had to come back and tell him his bike was gone.
Mhm.
And she's like, and I remember you were so disappointed in me. She said, that was worse. I wanted you to just yell at me. Like that would have almost made me feel better than you just knowing you were like disappointed in me. So that's
Aw.
the kind of home she grew up in.
Right.
They grew up in.
Well, and it shows.
And it shows.
It shows.
Yeah. Now, Maura was awarded a congressional nomination by the late Senator Ted Kennedy, just as her sister had been 2 years prior. And to give you an idea how impressive this was too, not just getting into West Point, but at the time of Maura's admission, women only made up 15% of the school population. This is a big deal.
Yeah, it's a really big deal.
Unfortunately, Maura's time at West Point did not turn into the dream that she and Julie had kind of imagined. Up to this point, Maura seemed, again, pretty perfect at everything. But even perfection can take its toll, especially in a super competitive environment like West Point. And starting out just as the sisters planned, Julie checked in on Maura. She would kind of give her tips about how to succeed. She would like smuggle in contraband. She talks about smuggling in like cookies. We're not talking about anything nefarious, like literally like cookies and like sodas and things just to kind of keep Maura's spirits up. And Julie felt like the big sister, right?
Sure.
So she could do that kind of thing. Maura slowly began kind of making her way at West Point, making relationships, and she started running on the running team, which certainly helped. It had definitely helped when she started beating the upperclassmen.
Oh, well, yes, that's an attractive thought.
It will earn her a lot of respect.
Yeah.
And she did well academically as well. I mean, that also helps that Julie was able to give her kind of some cheat sheets and things like that.
It's all about getting the job done however you have to do it. So,
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, before Maura was even accepted into West Point, Julie had already given her all of her plebe books. So plebe is like when you're a first year cadet. She had already given her kind of like all the manuals. So Maura already knew how to, make the bed and polish her uniform and do a lot of the things that you learn when you're there. She already knew how to do all those things. So it should have been a pretty smooth entry for her. Unfortunately, though, during Beast Barracks, which is the first summer when you enter West Point, it breaks you down. I mean, it's made to break you down. And Maura had a really hard time during this process. I mean, it's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, very little sleep, lots of demand on your time. Really, Beast Barracks.
so it's similar to boot camp.
Similar to boot camp.
Okay.
Absolutely. And one day, halfway through these Beast Barracks, Julie went to visit Maura, found her crying. Yeah, this is not typical of Maura.
Mm-hmm.
And Maura said at the time it was over some mean remark that an upperclassman had made. But Julie knew instinctually, like, Maura is just really struggling.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about that. There's something else going on here. And she realized that Maura was really struggling with just the rigid life at West Point. I mean, never having your own time, always being told what to do, and always being in competition physically, mentally. You know what I mean? Like always with your peers. It's always some kind of competition to do better, to perform better. And that was really weighing on Maura because she'd always been the best, but now you're with this extra level. You know what I mean?
So the competition's harder. How old was she at this point? How old?
18.
18. Okay. So a time when, at 18, I was free. I graduated high school and I'm having fun. I'm doing stuff. And here she goes into a even more rigid environment.
Yeah.
Where she's not the big fish in a small pond. Not to say that she was, because it sounds like she was a big fish in any pond.
She was doing very well.
Right.
She absolutely was doing very well. And what's interesting too is Julie was also very accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
She was a very accomplished runner. She was accomplished academically. When she got to West Point, she loved it. Like she loved feeling like it was propelling her forward. Like it felt like a bigger calling. But for Maura, it pushed her. She just had it was just a different personality. It just the pressure affected her differently.
Right.
And of course,
I get that because I am a smart person. I can tell you right now, I'm not going to West Point. That would be a horrible environment for me.
Right. And Julie and Maura both thought, well, if Julie loves it this much, surely Maura is going to love it. Right. And it just wasn't a good fit for Maura.
Right.
And
there's nothing wrong with that.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't the right fit for her.
Mm-hmm.
Despite that, though, she pushed through and she completed Beast Barracks. So she completed the first summer going into West Point. And then she started her first academic schedule starting in the fall. And, I think it says something for her that she was like, I'm going to stick it out.
That says a lot. Yeah, that says a lot.
Yeah. Now, she joined the cross-country team and she joined the track team and she actually joined with her sister. So this was really kind of a comforting thing for her. It was almost kind of like she had this little group of friends looking out for each other, within this big West Point machine, if you will. And of course, she entered as a freshman, which, again, earns a lot of respect. And she had already shot to the top, beating out a lot of her upperclassmen. And the team really rallied behind Maura. And again, they became kind of this tight-knit community. But life at West Point, again, as I said, was this constant competition. And that's on top of, remember, the normal hazing and screaming by your drill instructors and your ranking officers. And it's hard.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, wow, okay. Yeah, that's a lot.
The way it manifested in Maura is she developed disordered eating.
Okay.
And unfortunately, this is pretty common at competitive universities like West Point because the idea is you feel completely out of control. You have control over nothing. They tell you when you sleep. They tell you when you eat. They tell you when you exercise. They tell you exactly where you need to be, what you're doing, and you really don't have any mind of your own. So the one thing you can control is your eating. Eating disorders are not that uncommon at competitive universities. Now, the only people who knew about Maura's disordered eating were her closest friends and her sister. But unfortunately, all of them were so young and they didn't really even understand how to help their friend. They knew she was struggling with this, but the idea was, well, Maura has overcome so many other things, she's just going to figure it out. And none of them really knew. When you're a kid, you don't really know how to help your friend who's also a kid. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm saying kids lately, but 18, 19-year-olds, you don't have enough life experience to know when your friend truly needs help. And Maura was occasionally seeing a therapist, and everybody just kind of thought she would pull herself out of it. And Maura was clearly very embarrassed to talk about it too, and so nobody wanted to push it,
Right.
and make her feel uncomfortable or mean that she would maybe talk about it less. And so it was kind of like this secret that Maura had, which, adds an element of shame to it as well. It's hard to think about Maura feeling that way, anybody feeling that way.
Mm-hmm.
When Julie addresses Maura's eating disorder on her podcast, Media Pressure, that I was speaking about, she said that not getting help for Maura is one of the major regrets of her life.
Oh, that breaks my heart.
Yeah, she said, if I had known, maybe there was something else I could have done for her. And again, my heart breaks for Julie because, again, she was so young. What could she have done?
Well, and that's what, I hope Julie ultimately realizes that, we all look back and say, oh man, if I had only known, I would have done this differently. But that's not how life goes. She didn't know.
Yeah.
And it's nothing that happened was her fault. Like, she did the best she could with what she had. And that's what we all just do.
I agree. Hindsight is such a privilege, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, the next summer, so Maura made it all the way through her freshman year, made it to the next summer, Maura moved to what was called Camp Buckner. And this is where cadets learn kind of basic military skills, including handling firearms and other weaponry. And it was here that Maura made some pretty uncharacteristic changes. One day, while at the post exchange, which is kind of like the Walmart that they have on base, she and her friend Megan were just kind of perusing around the store. And for some reason, Maura pocketed like $10 or $15 worth of some kind of cosmetics. And at this point, nobody's really sure what it was. I mean, maybe lipstick, mascara, something like that. It's kind of irrelevant to the story, but some kind of cosmetics. And there's an interview with Maura's friend Megan on Media Pressure. And Megan says she didn't even see Maura do this.
She didn't even know.
Didn't even know.
Mm-hmm.
And the two girls were walking out and a security guard came and stopped Maura.
Oh no,
And
she got caught.
She totally got caught and said, you need to come with me so we can kind of discuss this. And Megan said she just remembered the look of shock on Maura's face, like almost like Maura didn't know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So Megan went back to her barracks. Maura had to stay and kind of talk it out with the administration there. And as you can imagine, as a cadet at West Point, this is not going to go well for her career there.
No. And I would assume this is a mark that would stay on her career probably forever, right? For the life of her. Maybe even, did she have plans to go into the military?
Well, we're going to get to that later.
Okay.
This is the year 2001.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So the world was very different.
Yes.
At the beginning of 2001.
Yes, than it was even at the end of 2001. Okay.
Exactly. So this is the beginning of 2001. So the world they lived in at that point is different than the world that we live in now.
They were not at war.
They were not at war.
Okay.
Exactly. Megan, of course, waited back at the barracks with anticipation for Maura to come back to find out, like, what happened? Why did you do that? What's going to happen? And Maura just looked at her and says, I don't know why I did that. And honestly, I feel like that's a very truthful answer. I'm not sure why that happened.
We all have those moments sometimes where we do something, not necessarily shoplifting, but where we just do something that's maybe a little out of character. Later on, we regret it. And we just think, I don't know why I did that.
Yeah, but I did it. Yeah. And while the dollar amount was minimal, the fact that it violated West Point's code of conduct was a big deal.
That's the big deal.
That's
Right,
the big deal, exactly. So as a result, she had to go before what they call an honor board. And the honor board lasts weeks. There's this process of finding out your guilt or innocence, and then whatever repercussions, consequences, punishment, whatever you want to call it, was going to result from your wrongdoing.
It's like a trial, kind of.
It's kind of like a trial.
Okay.
And during those few weeks until the final verdict, I guess, for lack of a better word, is doled out to you, you're not allowed to attend classes.
Oh.
You can't go to anything extracurricular. So Maura was not allowed to go to her track meets or practices. In lieu of going to classes and her extracurriculars, she had to do what I have called the walk of shame. She was made to walk for hours around the campus in an uncomfortable dress uniform while holding her rifle. She was not able to speak to anyone or take breaks, but instead walk while looking straight ahead. And it's clear that this treatment is not only meant to wear you down as like a physical punishment and a way of compelling remorse, but it's also to kind of strip you of time as well. So think about all this limited time that you had for studies, to communicate with your family, to kind of collect your thoughts, anything that meant something to you. You can no longer do it as you had to parade around campus. And again, this kind of West Point walk of shame. And I'm not saying that it's inappropriate. I'm just saying this is the life she's in right now.
It's harsh. So for like 8 hours a day, she's just walking around doing marches or whatever it is. So on top of everything she's feeling, it's also humiliating.
It's a little humiliating. Everyone knows.
Everyone, there's no like quietly being, reprimanded. This is, everybody know. Oh my gosh.
And it's really an example. Like, you do something against the code of conduct, this is what can happen to you.
Which, again, is part of their standard, and it's part of what makes, I guess, West Point so, like,
it's a code of conduct.
Right.
It's a code of honor.
Right.
If you're part of this program, you subscribe to this, these very rigid tests of character.
Right.
Really.
Right. But, man, we are all human.
We are all human, but you're not allowed to be at West Point.
Noted.
Again, this is a school that's producing the best of the best.
True.
And they're demanding the best of the best. Now, as we talked about, hindsight 2020, Julie, when asked about what she thought happened here, like, why would Maura do something like that? She feels like Maura may have consciously or subconsciously tried to do something to get her removed from West Point without actually quitting.
Okay, so she doesn't have to be the quitter. It's that choice is taken away from her.
Right.
I can see that. It's extreme. I don't know that being kicked out is better than leaving, unless the pressure coming from other places for her to stay was like so strong, or maybe she didn't want to disappoint her family, or whatever the reasons were.
Well, I think it's all of the things. And knowing what I know of Maura, it may have been to not disappoint herself.
Right? So just take the choice away. And you know what, honestly, as a slightly rebellious person, I can understand, like, when you're in this environment where you can't do anything really without approval, to want to just break one little rule. I can see
I think that you and Maura are different people, though, Cynthia.
Oh. You don't think that was her motive? What are you saying? You don't think I could get into West Point? Is that what you're saying?
You're just different people. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, while it was unlikely Maura would be, like, removed from West Point for an offense like this, it was, as we talked about, pretty serious. And Maura's consequence would have been pretty severe. But before Maura's future at West Point was decided, the 9/11 attacks happened and everything changed. As you can imagine, everything changed for civilians.
Right.
I can only imagine what happened at that moment for those involved in a military academy.
Right.
Now, most students that had joined the academy at this time honestly had no plans to go to war. It was just higher learning, higher education. But when that happened, it really came into sharp focus that soldiers were needed. at this point, and certainly West Point graduates that had had all of this rigorous training were very much needed. So students of West Point attend tuition free with the obligation that after graduation, they'll serve 5 years of active duty service and 3 years of active ready reserve.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So students currently enrolled in the school now had a choice. Either disenroll or continue on to graduation, knowing that you will be deployed to war.
Those are two tough choices, and both of them, quite frankly, are life altering. You either
Yeah.
give up the plan that, like, this is the path for my future, and you have to withdraw from that, or you're going to war, which is not really what you signed up for.
Right.
Okay.
So Julie and Maura kind of split ways at this point. Julie really felt like this was her future. And again, she was much closer to graduation at that point. I think she was going into her senior year. And so she decided to stick with it and wanted to follow through on her obligation to join the military. And Maura, who was already having kind of a bumpy time at West Point and was only then entering into her sophomore year, she decided deployment was not in her plan. That was not really what she wanted to do. As the timeline works out, she departed West Point before the completion of her honor board progression, but not before she met her soon-to-be boyfriend named Bill Rausch. Now, Bill was a student a few years older than Maura that helped students navigate the honor board system, which I guess can be kind of complicated to know where you need to be when you need to be there. And he and Maura began an on-again, off-again relationship that lasted through Maura's transfer to the University of Massachusetts. I will say Bill does come up in the disappearance and the investigation, so I'm going to talk a little bit about him now. Maura's family was not thrilled about this relationship because it was discovered that Bill had cheated on Maura shortly after they began dating. What I do want to communicate, though, is even with that knowledge, Julie, Maura's sister, never saw Bill to be physically violent and never really thought that he was capable of ever harming Maura. However, it was, a bit of a dicey situation, but both Bill and Maura seemed to care about each other.
Okay.
In the fall of 2002, Maura began school at the University of Massachusetts, and according to her friends and family, it took Maura a little bit of time to adjust to this new way of life because now she's going from a West Point student to a University of Massachusetts student. Big difference.
It's like a party, probably.
Yeah.
I would assume.
Yeah, and that freedom was a little disturbing for her. She didn't really know what to do with herself.
Sure.
And for her, it wound up being the small things, like being able to have personal items. Like apparently she had these purple cow sheets that she was like obsessed with that she could never have had at West Point. But she had these purple cow sheets that she was so pleased to have. She also was allowed to have a lot of personal photos, which again, she wasn't allowed to have at West Point. And for those that were closest to her, they felt like she was genuinely much happier being at the University of Massachusetts than she was at West Point.
It sounds like a better fit.
It just was a better fit, exactly. Now, Maura soon learned that she was also accepted in the very competitive UMass nursing program, and as was expected, she quickly joined the track team. So she was fitting in. She was kind of finding her way. Again, I mean, Maura's really amazing. Now, as a requirement of the nursing program that she went into, she was required to have her own reliable transportation to get to and from nursing rotations. So Maura's father, Fred, offered her his 1996 black Saturn sedan. And he was in the position where he was able to purchase a newer car model for himself. And so he and Maura figured it just made sense. She would take his older car and he would purchase a newer one. Having a car also allowed her to spend time with her friends back home and to get a few small jobs. Again, more independence, more freedom, and it really seemed to fit Maura. During this time, Maura also made some new friends, specifically two girls named Kate and Sarah. Now, according to Julie, Maura and Bill maintained a, quote, typical 20-something breakup and get back together relationship, end quote.
I remember those.
Yeah. And during one of these breakups, Maura became romantically involved with one of her UMass graduate assistant running coaches.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's a little different. Now, his name was Hussein Baghdadi, and because of their coaching relationship, they kind of kept it quiet, like their romantic relationship. But according to one of Maura's friends, Kate, he always seemed to be around, but it was very comfortable because, they were on the track team. He was on the track team. He wasn't that much older than them. And so it didn't seem unusual for him to be around. But just going to note that was, a bit scandalous,
Sure,
if
he
you will.
was her coach.
Right. Now, on the times that Maura and Bill were on good terms, they took several trips together to New Hampshire to see family. And on one of these trips in July of 2003, Bill had to leave early for military obligations, because remember, he's still at West Point. So Maura drove him back to Boston Logan Airport. On the way back, she was pulled over in Hooksett, New Hampshire, going well over the speed limit. She was given a summons to appear on August 27th, 2003, fined $360, and New Hampshire suspended her license for 30 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a strict response, I guess.
Yeah, pretty big bump in the road,
Yes.
honestly. Now, to get her license back, she had to file a license reinstatement form in person. And at the time of her disappearance, police found these forms for the reinstatement of her license in her car. Now, around this time, Maura also suffered an injury, so she could no longer participate in the track team. So things are already kind of not starting to go the way she would have wanted, I'm sure. So she cut back on running altogether, which kind of became a little concerning to her family because it had always been something that had given her joy. But in all other ways, she seemed to be doing well. She maintained close relationships with several of her high school friends and with her friend Megan from West Point, and again had made these new friends at University of Massachusetts. None of her friends from any of her walks of life suspected anything could have been amiss or was wrong. As a matter of fact, on February 12th, 2004, 10 days before Maura's disappearance, she sent an email trying to get friends together to go to a Dane Cook show.
Oh, I love Dane.
Isn't that like a name that was like literally at least like flood of memories came
yeah.
back?
I mean, he was so hot.
The Dane Cook days.
Dane.
I just remember, boys, I say boys, but young men,
Sure.
College students, like when I was in school, walking around just quoting Dane Cook because they thought it would make them look cool.
Oh, yeah.
But the show, so again, this email to get her friends to go was 10 days before her disappearance, but the show was not for a full 10 days after her disappearance.
So she had plans for the future.
So she had plans for the future, and this is just one thing that would indicate that. I'll give you a few more.
Mhm.
But again, this could mean nothing. It could mean everything. I don't know. I'm just giving you the facts as I've been able to find them out. Unfortunately, the one thing that was still hanging over Maura was the eating disorder.
Mm.
And unfortunately, it was in full swing. Julie feels that Maura's shame and lack of control over disorder. Julie has commented that Maura's shame and lack of control over her eating disorder may have even led to some of these subsequent bad decisions.
Okay.
At one point, Maura even stole a credit card number from another student and started ordering huge amounts of food late at night.
Okay. That's interesting. That's an interesting move. After the West Point, scenario and stuff. So she's definitely going through something.
She's going through something. And I think this just does show the shame that she felt about this. So, the idea, and they've never specifically said, just her disordered eating, about maybe she was binge eating and then
Mhm.
purging, that would have been the idea. So she would order huge amounts of food that would show up to the dorm very late at night.
So nobody could see.
And she would eat it by herself, and large quantities of food.
Was using somebody else's card a way, they think, to maybe hide the fact that she was doing it. Okay,
That's
so
what
it
her
wasn't
family
so much
thinks.
about stealing. It was more about, I don't want people to know that I'm doing this.
That's exactly right. They didn't
Oh,
want
that
her to
makes
know.
me so sad.
It's really hard, and I know it's hard for her family. Again, Julie has said, like, I wish I had known more about disordered eating so that I could have helped her more.
Mm.
Now, once the student noticed that they were having these charges at night, they alerted the police, and Maura was caught up in a sting operation based on this. So essentially, she ordered the food, and they found out where the food was going, and they busted Maura for it.
Oh, no. That's intense. Wow.
It's intense. And just like she had at West Point, though, Maura immediately fessed up that, she's at West Point. She fessed up immediately. Yeah, I stole these cosmetics. I don't know why I did it. And she immediately fessed up to stealing his credit card and said, yeah, I screwed up. Now, UMass's response to theft was very different than from West Point, and she was put on probation of some sort, but ultimately the whole thing was forgotten pretty quickly. Now, just a few months earlier at Christmas, Julie had been home from her deployment, and she remembers the holiday being very happy. Maura was in good spirits, and she was excited because Bill had given her her first cell phone.
Oh,
Big
yes.
deal.
Early 2000s. Very exciting.
Exactly. And a really pretty set of black leather gloves.
Oh.
When Maura got back to school, she moved into a dorm as a single. So she did originally have roommates, but now she's moved into a dorm where she's by herself. And Julie said that introverted Maura was so pleased about this. She was really excited to not have to deal with roommates, and this was a good situation, everybody thought, for Maura. And it's clear from looking at her dorm that Maura had unpacked several of her Christmas gifts, including a corduroy jacket that she had gotten and then a book from her aunt. And this is an important detail because there has been a long time thought that Maura's room was partially packed, meaning that she was preparing to leave. But her family strongly disagrees in this. They say she was still unpacking. And according to Maura's brother and mom, who visited her a few days before her disappearance, her room appeared to be more unpacked to them than it is when she had moved in just a few months earlier. And I know this is like such a weird thing to try to make a distinction, but it does go into what was Maura's frame of mind.
Sure. Well, if somebody disappears and then it looks like they've packed up their room, that tells you one thing. But if it's in fact that she was actually just still in the process of unpacking, that's very different. And I can understand how it could be, misconstrued by officials, but very important to the story, quite frankly.
Very important to the story. And the fact that those Christmas gifts were displayed, to me, that says something.
Right.
On Julie's podcast, Media Pressure, she addresses how these small misinterpretations, maybe, of a scene can really change the course of an investigation.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So police began to speculate that Maura was making a plan to possibly disappear, or even worse yet, possibly commit suicide because she was in kind of this shame spiral possible. And they based a lot of this theory, again, on the state of her room. So again, packed, unpacked, big difference.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the infamous letter. After Maura's disappearance, police found a printed email from Bill, which described his infidelity. Remember that cheating that had happened at the beginning of their relationship. And according to police, the letter was sitting on top of packed boxes. So, like, sitting out conspicuously as if it had been recently reviewed or recently read. That wasn't really the case, though. Maura's family were actually the ones that found the email amongst a bunch of papers in Maura's room. And as it turns out, Maura was just as sentimental as you are about cards and letters and things that have possible sentimental value. And so she had saved every birthday card, every Christmas card, anything of any kind of importance. And this letter from Bill was found folded in a box within a box.
So her family had pulled it out.
Her family's the one that found it later. And then the police said, oh, it was out, which doesn't make sense.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Right. So her family found it.
Yeah. And
one
said,
way.
here are things that we found.
Mm-hmm.
And then the police were like, oh, well, that's got to be it. She was packing up.
Sure.
And there's this letter.
Which I can see where you would come to that conclusion if you did find the letter out and it did appear that someone was packing up. I can see that. But her family saying, no, that's not the case, again, tells a very different story.
Right. Well, exactly. And a letter being out versus basically being hidden in a stack of other papers in like nesting boxes.
Mhm.
Very different.
But we don't know why the police said it was out. We don't know.
We don't have no idea.
Okay. We just know that the family has said, no, we found it somewhere else.
Correct. Honestly, I mean, I'm sitting here. I don't know which is true. However, I feel like I'm more inclined to believe Julie's version.
Well, why would they lie? What's their motive?
Ri-
But I can see if they brought it to the police later and the police found it saying, here we go. Here, this is her motive. Like I can see them using that.
And we'll go a lot more into the police later, but I do feel like they have a propensity to kind of cherry pick things that fit the narrative that they wish to promote.
Sure.
A few weeks before the start of the spring semester, Maura went to visit her father. Now, the Saturn she was driving, remember that reliable transportation she had to have for her nursing program? Well, it started to spew out black smoke.
Oh, no.
Not ideal. So her father took it to a mechanic, and the mechanic was wholly convinced that the car essentially couldn't be fixed.
Okay.
Now, okay, technically it could be fixed, but the amount of money that you would have had to put into it didn't make any sense.
Sure.
So Fred said, you know what? We'll scrap the Saturn. We'll just go and buy a new car. Fred knew that Maura had to get back to school. So he came up with a plan. He said, Maura, I want you to drive my newer car over to campus and I'll follow you in this kind of rickety Saturn. So we have somewhere to leave it until I can sell it.
Okay. And then he was going to take his car back?
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So he had the idea that Maura could kind of bum rides for at least the next few weeks until he could come back, figure out how to sell the car and get her something else.
Sure. Why not?
And I mean, it made sense.
That's exactly what I would do.
Yeah. So they arrived at campus and he parked the Saturn in the very back of a student parking lot at University of Massachusetts where it wouldn't be in the way. And he told Maura, under no circumstances, drive this car. I mean, like a good dad, right? I mean, not only is he worried that something additional could break on the car and she would be stuck somewhere, but also spewing black smoke and oil, you're going to get pulled over and you're going to get a ticket.
And she currently still does not have a license. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, that part too.
But she is in the works of trying to get that figured
She's
out.
in the works.
Okay.
Exactly. But he's like, just don't drive this car. Like, we're just going to leave it here. I'm literally leaving it here until I can sell it. That's all. He's just finding a spot. Now, just as Fred had suggested, Maura was able to catch some rides. So that worked out. Now, according to Maura's phone records, she had contacted several used car lots asking about purchasing a new car, and Fred planned to come visit her on the weekend of February 7th and 8th, a Saturday and a Sunday. Thursday before he visited, Maura was scheduled to work at one of her jobs, which was a security shift at Melville Hall, a dormitory on campus. And it was a student job of checking IDs for students entering and exiting the building. And Maura usually sat at the desk and kind of did her schoolwork. Like, it wasn't a real labor-intensive job here, right?
Yeah.
So she kind of did her schoolwork. But for some reason, this night was different. Her phone records show that Bill called her cell phone at 7:17 p.m. and the call lasted 20 minutes. And then he called her again at 9:56 p.m. for 6 minutes. She took a cell phone call from her older sister, Kathleen, at 10:10 p.m. It was later revealed that over the 28-minute call with her sister Kathleen had disclosed to Maura that she was relapsing into her alcoholism. And Kathleen's then husband was not supporting her sobriety.
So a distressing phone call.
A distressing phone call. I think that's the right way to say it. And Maura was understandably upset. However, not to the degree where she couldn't complete her job. So she decided to stay at the desk, work through the rest of her shift. Records show she took a call from Bill at 12:07 for 7 minutes. Bill said nothing about the call was out of the ordinary. Then at 1 a.m., for a reason no one has been able to ascertain, Maura became completely inconsolable, crying, and was almost unresponsive. Her security supervisor came over and tried to help her, and the only thing that Maura could say was, "My sister, my sister." Now, the supervisor escorted Maura to her dorm room and offered to sit with her a while until she could calm down, but Maura waved off the supervisor, saying that no, she could just talk to her roommate.
But
Now
she doesn't have a
she
roommate.
doesn't have a roommate. Exactly. Her family has interpreted this to mean Maura just wanted to handle her emotions on her own, that more introverted nature came out, and then just, again, not wanting to feel shame, not wanting to feel out of control of things. To this day, no one's really sure what made Maura so distressed. Was it really the call with Kathleen? I mean, she did say, my sister, but according to Kathleen, she didn't believe the call was that upsetting. Like by the time she got off the phone with Maura, it wasn't, Maura was upset, but it wasn't something that would have left Maura just completely inconsolable. Maybe Bill had said something. That was the last phone call she had almost an hour before her breakdown. He didn't seem to think anything he said would be that upsetting. I want to note, too, that, that cell phone that Bill had gotten for Maura for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
So that was paid for by Bill on his family plan, which, okay, that makes sense, right? I don't think at first I was like, oh, is he like trying to control her or something? I don't think so. I just think it made sense, right? She doesn't have any money. He had a little extra. He's just going to put her cell phone on his like family plan. But what this does mean, though, if Maura was seeing someone else, she probably would not have had them call her on that cell phone, which is the only thing we have records for. And she was working at a desk, which had a landline.
Okay.
So sometime between when she talked to Bill at 12:07 and 1 a.m., she could have gotten another phone call from someone. But then what would make her mutter, my sister?
Unless that was just an excuse.
It could have been as well.
Because she can't say, oh, my other boyfriend or my whatever.
Whatever. Exactly.
But I can also see, I mean, I would be curious to know, like, what all was said during this conversation with her sister. Because it is possible that, like, she's really upset for her sister. Her sister's really struggling and not getting the support. And, I can see that causing you to be really upset. And you hold it together as long as you can. And then, so I'd be curious to know how upsetting that conversation got. Like to what extent is her sister being affected by this?
Well,
we probably don't have that information.
We do have a little. Actually, Julie did tell us a little bit more about it.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen had just been released from a sober living situation.
Okay.
And her husband picked her up and immediately took her to a liquor store.
Oh.
Upsetting.
I would be pretty upset about that.
That's pretty upsetting.
That could potentially cause me to break down.
And also, what a jerk.
Oh, no,
This is terrible.
Horrible.
But apparently that was their relationship. It was kind of one of these, he liked to control her by keeping her intoxicated. Just toxic.
I hope they're not still together, but
they are not. Unfortunately, Kathleen has passed away, which it's really unfortunate. But again, even Kathleen, even after saying, we talked about it, Kathleen did not feel, even the information that she had shared, she didn't feel that Maura would have had the emotional reaction that she wound up having.
Okay. So that's what we can go off of. So it sounds like there's really no reasonable explanation as to why this happened.
We know she was upset. And then further, we do know by looking at her credit card statements that in the wee hours of the morning, she ordered late night pizza, which, if her history indicates anything, she felt out of control.
Okay.
Now, I want to interject at this point and address a rumor that Maura might have been involved in some kind of hit and run on this night. There's kind of this long-standing rumor that that's what set her off, that she was out driving, she had been involved in a hit and run, and there certainly was a hit and run that was reported in Amherst, but it has been completely investigated, researched up and down. It was not her. She was not involved in that. That is not the reason she was upset.
Okay. I feel like I may have heard that, so I'm glad you are able to clarify that.
Yeah.
And isn't that crazy how stuff can get so misreported? Like, that's a big deal.
That's a big deal.
So for it to be completely untrue is really sad that got reported.
Again, that's one of the reasons this is so important to cover this case.
Right.
Now, the next morning on Friday, classes were canceled because of a snowstorm. So as far as we know, the day passed pretty quietly for Maura. She had the breakdown Thursday night, kind of like early Friday morning. But then Friday, fairly uneventful, again, from what we know. And then on Saturday, Maura's father, Fred, drove to UMass to look for a new car with Maura. Maura greeted Fred on Saturday morning and said nothing to him about Thursday night. And from what I know of Maura, that seems pretty par for the course. She wasn't one to want to burden others with her issues. And of course, in hindsight, Fred has admitted in an interview that he would have wanted nothing more than to discuss this with Maura and to help her through it. That day, Maura and her father went to several used car lots and found some pretty good options. Maura even called her sister Julie around 3 p.m. to tell her about a particular car that she liked. Maura and Fred ended the day by stopping for dinner and drinks at a local brewery. And they were basically trying to gain strength to start bright and early on Sunday to hit some more dealerships. There's no tired, like car shopping tired. Is that the truth?
Oh, what a nightmare.
What a nightmare.
Thank goodness for, is it Carfax or something like that? There's something you can buy a car. The last like 5 or 6 cars my parents have bought have literally been online. And I'm like, that's the only way to go.
It is exhausting. The whole thing is exhausting. Partway through dinner, Maura, like a typical college kid, said, "Hey, Dad, would you mind if I invite my friend Kate to dinner with us?" And as anyone who's attended college knows, one of the best things about having your parents in town is they pay for all your meals.
Yeah.
And your friends too. So, of course, Fred agreed, said, yeah, have her come on. So Kate and Maura both finished dinner with Fred, and then they decided that they wanted to go to a few parties on campus. So Fred drove the 2 girls to a liquor store where Maura bought a box of red Franzia wine. You know, the box kind. You're making a face. In college is different, right?
It's never been that different for me.
I personally, wow, this is going to make me sound really bougie, but I have never had wine out of a box.
No, me neither.
And that's not that I wouldn't. I'm just not a wine. Like, that's just not a big draw for me. So it hasn't been a deal. But I know those boxes are very popular.
And I'm sure when you are 21 years old, they probably taste delicious. But I've never been quite that desperate for a glass of wine.
Desperate.
Yeah, no. Mm-mm.
Now, this box of wine would later be found in Maura's car after her disappearance.
But they were purchasing it for like a party they were going to immediately.
Right.
Was the box empty, opened?
As far as I know, it was still intact and none of it was consumed.
Okay.
The girls then dropped Fred off at his hotel and took his car back to campus. Remember, they only had the one usable car. The 2 went to a party hosted by Maura's other friend, Sarah. What happened at this campus party, for the most part, is a complete mystery to everyone, including the Murray family. Sarah, who was hosting the party in her dorm room, has refused to make any comments to, well, anyone, really. Not the media. She's had limited communication with law enforcement and almost no communication with the Murray family.
That's suspicious.
It's strange. Now, she spoke to Fred on one occasion, and all she would say is that she was sleeping during the party.
Also, unlikely. Let me throw a party so I can sleep.
In a dorm room.
In a dorm room, because that is very conducive for sleep. Now, I will say, if there was other illegal activity or just things that she doesn't want, like, I can imagine a bunch of college kids doing stuff they don't want, being spread around.
Yeah, they're not going to advertise. They're going to advertise
Right.
everything that they're doing. But at the same time, one of your very good friends disappeared and you're not going to help. I don't know. Maybe she's just a private person that doesn't want to be quoted in the media.
I can see not talking to the media for sure, but to not talk to the police and to not talk to the family, that's what bothers me. I don't think I would talk to the media just out of respect. I wouldn't feel like that was I'm not going to give you a story about my friend, but I would talk to the family and I would talk to the police. Unless there was something I didn't want getting out.
So I have to say, again, maybe this means nothing. Maybe this means everything. We just don't know.
Right. It's all circumstance. It's just these circumstantial things.
Yeah. But her saying she was sleeping during the party,
I find that difficult to believe, but who knows? I don't know.
Kate, who again attended the party with Maura, has spoken about the party and said while she didn't know anyone else in attendance at the party besides Maura, it was a low-key gathering and she felt comfortable throughout the party.
Okay.
It has also been made known that Sarah's male cousin and several of his friends that did not attend the University of Massachusetts were at the party. Now, honestly, nobody knows much more than that.
They could have been anybody. We don't even really know who they are because nobody knew them. Is that what you're...
Exactly.
Is that what we're
I
implying?
don't know. I mean, we just don't know anything about them. We know that Sarah was hosting the party. We know Kate and Maura were at the party. But even Kate, like her memory of it, she did I listened to an interview of her talking about it. Granted, I mean, the interview that I heard was like 20 years after the fact, but you would think when your friend disappears that night that would cement the memory in your mind. But even her, she was like, I don't know. I just assume it was probably like every other party we went to. We were just kind of sitting around drinking beers, just kind of cracking jokes. So
that's uneventful for sure. So, okay. But I'm with you. Like you would think you would remember a little more about something so, close to such a big day.
yeah. And again, that could mean nothing. It doesn't mean Kate has a bad memory. I don't know.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
It could mean they went to a lot of parties.
Yeah, exactly. What we do know is that Kate and Maura left the party around 2 a.m. Kate went back to her dorm, and despite it being so late and having been drinking, Maura decided to get into Fred's car and began driving towards what we think was Fred's hotel. We're not sure where she was going.
How far away was Fred's hotel from the college? Do we know?
I mean, it was only a few miles.
Okay,
It wasn't far.
But why would she go to see her dad in the middle of the night after drinking?
After drinking, when her friend was like, okay, see it, and even Kate, when Julie was interviewing Kate, she's like, well, where did you think Maura was going? She's like, oh, I mean, I just assumed she was walking to her dorm.
Right.
Like, where else would she go?
Right. Weird. Okay.
Now, on the way to, again, what we think was Fred's hotel, Maura wound up crashing the car at a T intersection about a mile off campus at 3:30 a.m. Police became aware of the crash because a University of Massachusetts cadet, first-year student, called in to report the crash. Now, to this day, we aren't sure who this cadet was, or if he was with Maura at the time of the crash, or if he just happened to be passing by and stopped to help her.
Let me ask you this, because she left the party around 2 and she's in a crash a mile away at 3:30. A pretty big lapse of time, an hour and a half.
Okay, bingo.
We don't know what happened.
We have no idea.
Okay.
Where was she during that hour and a half?
Okay.
We don't know. Was she driving around? Was she hanging out somewhere else on campus and then got in the car later? We honestly have no idea.
We just know she was in a crash at around 3:30.
Exactly. And again, the guy that reported the crash, we don't know who he was, if he was with her, if he was a passerby. We don't know anything. When the responding officer arrived at the scene, he didn't perform any kind of field sobriety test, nor did he call for medical attention.
So Maura was still there.
Maura was there.
She was at the crash scene.
And Fred's car was there.
Okay.
And pretty damaged car. And this guy, this officer arrived, and all he noted was that Maura was simply inattentive, which caused her to lose control of the vehicle.
So she couldn't have been that intoxicated, or she hid it really well for him not to even think to, do a field sobriety test.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just didn't feel like doing the paperwork. I mean, that is possible. Terrible to think about, but possible.
All the above could apply.
Sure.
Maybe it had just been a really busy Saturday night.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay.
Now, you notice Maura didn't call for herself because, as it turns out, she left her cell phone in Sarah's dorm. Could mean nothing. Could mean something. Was that on purpose? Was it an accident? Did something happen in the dorm that caused her to leave without her phone?
And then try to drive to her dad?
Yeah.
Oh, my true crime brain is just thinking of all these really horrible things that could have potentially
But again,
happened.
it could have been nothing. It could have been she had a few beers and she just forgot it. She had only had it a few months.
Yeah,
You know what
that's
I
true.
mean?
It wasn't like it is today where you take your phone to the bathroom with you, like, quite
Right.
frankly, where
Right.
you are always with
Like your
it.
smartphone.
Yeah,
Exactly. So it
it
was
was
different.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah, these were like flip phones, right? Or maybe like
Right.
the Nokia or yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. I don't
The Nextel.
Yeah. So maybe it meant nothing.
Okay.
But whatever it was, she did not have her phone on her. Now, as I said, the accident left Fred's car pretty heavily damaged, and it was towed to a car lot adjacent to his hotel, and Maura rode with the tow driver. Now, she stayed the night with her father, and the next morning told her father about the accident. And Fred was understandably upset. And first, he was clearly concerned for her safety, just worried, like, are you okay? You could have really hurt yourself. But then he said, Maura, you could have been cited for a DUI and you're already kind of in trouble. And Maura insisted that she had stopped drinking hours before the accident and was not inebriated. So she said she was not inebriated. And again, there was no sobriety test performed. So all we can kind of go on is her word.
I mean, it kind of lines up though. The fact that the police officer didn't. I mean, he could have gotten in a lot of trouble if it was learned that he let, a drunk person go
Right.
without investigating that further. So
Right.
maybe she was sober.
Right. Now, clearly, after this new development, car shopping was off the table for Sunday,
They don't
right?
even have a car to get to the car shop.
That's exactly right. And so the day was now spent
Aw.
arranging for a rental car for Fred, trying to get Fred's car in to be repaired, trying to work out with the insurance company. I mean, all the things that happen when you have like a major accident. While Fred was relieved that Maura was okay, he was understandably overwhelmed with how to shuffle all these pieces back together, especially because he had to be home the next day for a contract job. So while he's trying to put all this together, Maura is just beside herself with guilt and grief and shame and worry. And as it turned out, the insurance company said that everything would be covered except for a $500 deductible. So ultimately, when it comes to the finances, I mean, it's kind of a best case scenario. However, this really did put Fred in kind of a pinch, and Maura felt it.
Well, and he's probably also feeling like here's his daughter who her whole life is just like shown and just everything's come so easily for her. And then it's very clear that the last few years she's been struggling and he's probably really worried about her and frustrated because he's the one having to clean up the mess, as parents often are,
Yeah.
and just all of the feelings that go along and just wanting her to get back on track.
Well, and Fred does say that, yeah, in the beginning, especially because he's so worried about her, he was pretty intense about it. But then he saw how she was internalizing it. And he's like, and I immediately backed off. He's like, Maura, it's just a car. It's
Right.
just money. Like he said all the things a loving father would say. Like, we make mistakes. Everything that happened can be fixed. Like, you've just got to kind of let some of
Right.
this go. But she, according to her father, was almost like inconsolable. Like she was had just ruined everything for him.
She's just going through it.
She's going through it.
Going through it.
Yeah. In an interview with Fred, he said he told her over and over that it made no difference to him. He was just happy that she was safe. Now, having no choice but to go back to work, Fred checked out of the hotel and dropped Maura off at her dorm. He left her with instructions to go to the Massachusetts Department of Motor Vehicles to get the accident report on Monday to wrap up things for the insurance company. And she was supposed to call him on Monday night to go over the paperwork. When Fred dropped her off at the dorm, Fred said Maura slowly slumped out of the car and into the dorm, still crying. It's heartbreaking to think of her in this situation. Now, sadly, that was the last time that Fred ever saw Maura.
Oh, my heart is shattered for Fred. Like that's rough. That's hard to see your child in that way even if you see him tomorrow. But then to know that that was the last time, like that's the last time he saw her, like
Yeah,
that's
that it haunts him.
all.
Like, and again, he had no choice. I mean, he's like, I had to get back for this job. This is not a job that I could lose, especially now that I need to buy a new car. I've got to, I've got to provide for my kids. And so it's not that he did anything incorrect in this situation.
Right. Of course not. But just to know that she was just in such a dark place.
Right. Now, that day, Maura would retrieve her cell phone from Sarah's dorm, and that night, Fred and Maura did speak. And Fred again tried to comfort her by saying that everything that happened can be fixed, but Maura was still very upset. And that, sadly, would be the last time Fred would ever speak to Maura. And that is where I'm going to leave you for part 1.
Brokenhearted. Brokenhearted is where you leave me, Stephanie. Oh.
Yeah. Next week, I'm going to tell you about Maura's last day and all the things that may mean something and may mean nothing that happened. And then kind of some of the theories, trying to put some ideas together as to where she might be, as to what may have happened to her. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the Murray family thinks happened as well. If there was ever a time when we need the branch of hope, now would probably be it. Cynthia brought us, well, kind of horrible case last week about sweet little Paulette, but out of that comes an incredible opportunity to give through the Branch of Hope Foundation for
The Gift of Life 27.
The Gift of Life 27. Yeah, Cynthia, why don't you remind us about that?
The Gift of Life 27 is a nonprofit that's right here in Central Florida where the Dark Oak is, and they help provide comfort and support to families who are affected by premature birth. And they have just been able to help thousands of little babies and families, and they're doing such good work. So this month, the Dark Oak will be giving a portion of our earnings from our Patreon and our sponsors to that beautiful organization. We're very, very excited to be able to do that.
Yeah, if you want to know more about our Branch of Hope or more about some of the organizations we have sponsored in the past or other ways to connect to the Gift of Life 27, please go to our website at thedarkoak.com. You can also join our Patreon, where a portion of your subscriptions will go to support the Branch of Hope Foundation. We are simply a podcast leading through words and actions. And if you love this episode, love us, or love what we are doing at the Branch of Hope Foundation, please like and subscribe and tell someone. You can also forward this episode to a friend who might like it.
And please send us an email at thedarkoakpodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from our listeners. We're open to your questions, your comments, anything else you want to share. And for other ways to connect, hop on over to thedarkoak.com.
And obviously, we'll see you back next week when we cover, well, the rest of Maura's story. And actually, it's not finished yet. I feel like one day we're going to know. And for her family's sake, I really hope we do. We're just doing our part.
I literally got chills when you said that, when you said it's not finished yet, because what a beautiful reminder that's true. That's our purpose here, to shine light and hopefully help bring attention and awareness. So you're right. It's not finished.
All right. Well, we love you, Shiver Seekers.
We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Creep for our amazing music.